Everyone's talking about AI at the moment, from the existential threat that it poses to humanity to the kids that are using it just to write their English essays for school. But it can also be a really useful tool for creating new and interesting content. And a popular way of doing that at the moment is using text-to-image generators. You input a simple text prompt and it will then almost immediately create an image for you based on that prompt, sometimes of a photorealistic quality. One of the more popular tools that's doing this at the moment is MidJourney, which is the one responsible for bringing you the image of the Pope wearing a fashionable white puffer jacket. Now, whilst most of these services at the moment can only generate still images, that doesn't mean that you can't create video from that. To prove this point, a few days ago I posted a video that I created which covers the whole of the last 3.7 billion years since the very beginning of life itself. So let's have a quick look. I created all of the imagery for that in MidJourney and I posted the full video a few days ago. I'll pop a link in the description below, and if you haven't seen it yet, make sure you go check it out. A lot of you really seem to like it and you wanted to know how it was made, so in this video I'm going to be going through how to create an infinite zoom video like that using MidJourney and Adobe After Effects, as well as Photoshop, Topaz and Premiere for optional additional quality, and I'll also be talking about DaVinci Resolve for those that don't have access to Adobe. It's worth mentioning at this point that it's not necessarily going to be the quickest of processes. To make that video, I had to create 163 images in MidJourney, and even though the video uses 163, to get the exact ones I wanted, I needed to generate over 4,000 images, which meant that I spent around 2 weeks generating those images. Obviously that's for a 3-minute video, so if you're going to be creating a shorter video, it's going to take you a lot less time. Let's not waste any more time, let's get stuck in. Welcome to another 3D revolution. In the MidJourney 5.2 update, they added the zoom out and custom zoom features. This allows you to take an existing image you've already generated using MidJourney and zoom out from it, keeping the existing image exactly as it is in the center of the new one. Another way of looking at it is it takes your existing image and shrinks it down to 50%, then fills in the blank space, perfectly merging it into the new zoomed image. It's worth noting that MidJourney may slightly modify the outer edge from the original image to better merge it with the new prompt, but don't worry about that too much, we'll be looking at how to work around that later. This then allows us to create an infinite zoom video, which is a style of video which was popularized in the film Limitless, where you've got a video where the camera is constantly zooming back and back and back through different environments, going through keyholes and windows and doorways, using them as a transition point to go between different environments and locations and subjects. So here, we're going to be zooming back through the entirety of our video. However, you can follow this exact same process and then reverse the video at the end so that it's infinitely zooming in rather than zooming out. This isn't a tutorial on how to set up and use MidJourney, but it is a very easy thing to get started with and runs inside Discord. If you really want me to do a tutorial on the initial setup of MidJourney and how to create your own Discord channel with MidJourney running in it, pop a comment below, and if enough of you do so, I will create a tutorial for you. With this in mind, this video is assuming that you have MidJourney and After Effects up and running, although I am also going to be talking about how you can create a very similar, though not quite as smooth effect using either Adobe Premiere or DaVinci Resolve if you don't have After Effects. So let's get started with setting up MidJourney for creating images specifically for use in a video. As we're producing a video, you likely want the aspect ratio 16:9, but regardless of the aspect ratio you want, you can manually assign it each time you submit a prompt by adding --AR space 16:9 or your preferred aspect ratio at the end of your prompt, and it will output it in 16:9. But we're about to be producing a lot of images and we want them all to be the same aspect ratio. You can set up MidJourney to automatically assign an aspect ratio for every prompt you submit. To do that, come down and enter /prefer suffix and then hit enter. Then enter --AR space 16:9 or your preferred aspect ratio, and then hit enter again. It's now going to automatically assign the 16:9 aspect ratio to every image we submit. You can assign other functions using the prefer suffix feature if you want, and if you ever want to remove them, you can simply go / prefer suffix again, and then submit this without entering any text afterwards. You can see it now says suffix is now removed, and it will no longer automatically assign the aspect ratio that we previously had set. However, we do want 16:9, so I'm going to quickly pop that in again. So now we've come to generating the first image of our video. This is the stage in this entire process where you're going to have the most control of what your video looks like. So make sure that you are really happy with the image you choose before you continue. I'm going to start out with a similar fashion to what I've got going up here. And I'm going to submit a prompt for close-up photo of cute cat in large dark cave. You can see that it's automatically assigned the aspect ratio of 16:9. Okay, so they've come out, and let's have a look. Well, these are all great. I think for what I'm planning, this one is going to be the best one. So let's upscale that one. That's number 3. And then let's take another look. As I say, you don't want to continue until you're absolutely sure that this is the one for you. I am sure this is great. We'll open that, and we will save this to a new folder as 001. The next thing we're going to want to do is to zoom out. We have 2 options here. We have zoom out 2 times, and we have custom zoom. There is also zoom out 1.5 times, but we're not going to be using that for the production of our infinite zoom video. Zoom out 2 times simply uses the same prompt that your source image, the one you're applying to, used. Custom zoom allows you to change and customize the prompt. Remember that regardless of which one you use, that prompt that's being applied is only being applied to the new area of the image around the outside that you're zooming out to, and that this original image, which then becomes the center of your new one, is going to be exactly the same, other than some very slight changes around the outside of the border to help it better blend with your new image. Generally, you're going to want to have 2 to 4 images per environment before you start heavily modifying your prompts to transition to the next environment. So after you generate the image that contains your main focus in your current environment, the cat being the focus and the cave being the environment, do a custom zoom and remove any mention of your subject that you don't want repeated as it starts to zoom out. As we zoom out here, we don't want to have more cats painted in on the sides. So if we go for a custom zoom, we can then change this to close-up photo of cute cat in large dark cave to just photo of large dark cave, and we'll submit that. Okay, let's see what we've got here. I'm going to go for 1. So we'll upscale that, and we will save this as 002. One challenge I faced while producing the images for my big infinite zoom video about evolution was trying to convince MidJourney not to include things which hadn't yet evolved at that point in the story. I found that grass was a particularly frustrating one, as MidJourney tends to try to put grass in outdoor images of wildlife that are in fields and woodlands. However, MidJourney does have a really useful function, which is --no. It tends to take this function into account around 60% of the time you use it, but the frustrating thing is you can't have more than 1 no function per prompt. Also, MidJourney doesn't recognize punctuation, so you couldn't put --no grass, birds to avoid having grass and birds. It would then try to avoid including birds made of grass or birds in some way associated with grass. You can play around with it, but I haven't yet found an effective way of making multiple negative functions work. However, you can include negative words in the main part of your prompt. So if you wanted an image of the woodlands and you wanted to avoid grass and birds, you could make a prompt something along the lines of grassless woodland --no bird. I was obviously lucky and liked one of the images from my first zoom out. However, if you didn't like one of these or it wasn't exactly perfect, Keep on repeating your zoom, whether it be a zoom out 2 times or custom zoom, until you find an image you're really happy with. If you want to repeat your custom zoom, you can just hit this button here on the ones that you didn't like, and it's going to repeat the exact same prompt referencing the same image that you did it in, so referencing this image here, and it will generate another 4 images for you. Now you're going to want to zoom out 2 to 4 times before you start transitioning to your next environment. I've only done it once, so I'll do 1 more zoom out. I'm pretty happy with this prompt because it doesn't include cats anymore, so I'm not going to get any more cats in there. And I think this is a pretty good description of how I want it to zoom out, so I'm just going to go zoom out 2 times. Okay, let's have a look at these. Okay, I know they're looking quite dark, but that's going to play into how I'm planning to eventually transition to the next environment. So let's go for number 1 again. And remember, each time you choose one that you're happy with, once you've upscaled it, make sure that you open it, check it over, make sure it all looks good for you. I did have some that randomly just had some little scrambled text in the corner that you wouldn't have noticed in the thumbnail, so make sure you do look at them properly, and then save that as 003. Remember, incrementing the number each time you save a new image. Once you've zoomed away from your subject enough, it's good to start thinking about how you could start manipulating your current environment to help better aid the transition to the next environment. A good example of this in my big infinite zoom video is when I was moving from the meteorite that was killing the dinosaurs into the forming of the ice age. I had white smoke creep in around the edges of the image and then have that smoke better transition into the edges of the ice. Here, I'm having the edges become quite dark. I've been specifying a dark cave, and that is going to help me with my transition to my next image now. So at this stage, I'm now going to do a custom zoom and start introducing the next environment. So here we're going to have a photo of black camera lens. Okay, these aren't going to quite work with the transition I had in mind. I'm going to redo my custom zoom. I'm going to slightly modify my prompts to give me a better chance of having it work how I want it to. So I'll come back to my source image and I'm going to go close-up photo of black camera lens. Yeah, I think 2 is going to work slightly better for me, so let's go for number 2. So we'll upscale number 2 and we will check this out, make sure it all looks good. That looks good to me. And we will save this as 004. Now repeat this process going through each of your environments and subjects until you have completed all of the images you need for your video. There are a few pointers I'd like to quickly cover regarding image generation. The first being, if at any point in the process you decide that an earlier image you've made you'd like to go back and change, you want to regenerate it, bear in mind that if you do that, you will need to remake every image from that point, because if you do go back and regenerate an image, it's going to be different, and the next image in the sequence that you've already made is not going to merge with it. It's not going to be the same zoom out, and you're going to have to recreate everything from that point. So make sure before you do a zoom out, you are absolutely happy with the image that you're zooming out from, because coming back and changing it is going to be an absolute nightmare. The next thing I wanted to mention is that with a zoom, it should make sure that the previous image is perfectly centered in your new one, but for some reason that's not always the case. Of the 163 images that I used in my video, it was only in the editing process that I realized that at 3 different stages, the previous image was off-center in the new one. And what this meant is, as I was zooming out, objects in the middle would jump up and down and left and right, and it was no longer a smooth zoom. The only way that I could make it work was to spend some time-consuming editing, manually adjusting the position to make sure that it was slightly smoother, but even then, it's not perfect. The best thing I can suggest for this is to make sure every time you export an image and save it as 003, 004, that you open up the latest image on your computer and tab between that and the previous one a few times and make sure that everything looks like it's zooming out correctly and that the new image has a centered previous image in there. And if not, go back and make some more generations, because you really want that centered to make sure you've got a nice smooth image. One thing I've noticed is the more you zoom out in MidJourney, the more zooms that you apply to the same series as images as we are here, the darker it seems to try and make it. It doesn't matter how many prompts that you apply to have a nice well-lit image, you want it to be bright and sunny and daytime, it seems to always try and apply a natural vignette, whether it be like tree cover or dark clouds. It starts to make the image darker and darker, and that creeps in from the edges. The best thing to avoid this is every now and then inject a scene, inject a location into your video, which MidJourney is almost certainly going to interpret as being a brightly lit, well illuminated scene, and that will bring some light back into your video until it starts to vignette it again. Before we move on, let's have a quick rundown of the different steps involved in generating your images. The first thing you want to do is make sure that your preferred aspect ratio, which is probably 16:9, is set up to run automatically with all of your prompts. The best way to do this is to make sure that the AR function is set up in the prefer suffix settings. Next, you want to run prompts to generate your initial image, and keep on doing this until you've got the perfect starting image. Once you've got it, upscale it, save it to your computer, and save it as 001. Now, go to custom zoom, slightly modify your prompt so it's talking less about your subject and more about the environment your subject is in, and then keep on running a custom zoom until you've got one you like, then save that as 002. And then keep on repeating this process until you've got all the images you need, with a preference of 2 to 4 images per subject or environment. Ideally, you'd like one image of the new environment before your subject, one image of your subject in its environment, and then 2 images of that environment before you start transitioning to the next environment. Now that you've got all your images generated and saved, the next stage is optional but highly recommended, and that is further upscaling. MidJourney exports its 16:9 images at 1456 by 816 pixels, and in the editing process we're going to be stretching each of our images to double their native resolution. So with a starting resolution of less than HD, that's not a great starting point. As a result, the best thing to do is to run all of the images through software such as Topaz Photo or Topaz Gigapixel, which uses AI to upscale images without losing quality. The reason this step is optional is because Topaz isn't free, and technically it's not essential, but is necessary if you want a high quality video at the end of this process. If you do have Topaz Photo or Gigapixel, ensure none of the features are activated except for upscale or increase resolution, and export a set of all of your images to a new folder at around 4630 by 2595 pixels. Alternatively, if you have Topaz Video Enhance, you could skip this step now and upscale your final video at the very end, which would help make sure that the upscale details are consistent throughout the whole video. If you did want to Photoshop any of the images, adding, removing, or changing any of the details in them, now is the point you'd need to do that. But it's important to know that if you change any image, you're going to need to replicate the exact same change in every image before and after that one, where that section is visible, making sure that it's exactly the same. The ideal thing here would be to Photoshop the area where that section is the biggest, then copy and paste and scale that change to all the other images. Now we're going to convert our still images into an infinite zoom video. Whilst it is possible to do this in DaVinci Resolve or Premiere Pro, I'll be doing it here in Adobe After Effects as it has some additional features which make for a much smoother final video. I will, however, reference what you need to do differently if you are using Premiere or DaVinci at the appropriate times. But here's an example of the difference that After Effects can make. This is an infinite zoom made in After Effects. And this is the same infinite zoom made in Premiere. There are technically ways of replicating the same After Effects look in Premiere and DaVinci, but it's a lot more time consuming and not ideal when you've got 150 plus images to apply it to. Okay, so the first thing we need to do is obviously create a new project, and we're going to quickly save this. We'll go File, Save As, and then we'll just call this creatively Infinite Zoom. Before we import our images, you'll want to set the default length that your still images are imported at and set that to 2 seconds. In After Effects, you can do that by going to Edit, Preferences, Import, and then at the top here, under Still Footage, tick the box next to the text input, and set this to 2 seconds. And we'll click OK. In Premiere Pro, it's a very similar process. Just go to Edit, Preferences, down to Timeline, and then under Still Image Default Duration, just set that to 2, and then make sure that seconds is selected and click OK. And in DaVinci, just go to DaVinci Resolve at the top, Preferences, go to the User tab, over to Editing, and then down in the General Settings, there will be Standard Still Duration, and set this to 2, making sure that seconds is selected, and click Save. Now in our project window, let's create a bin to put our images in, and we'll creatively call that Images. Now either double click in the project window, press Ctrl-I, or go to File, Import, and then File, and import all of your images. Now we want to create a new composition, so you can right click in the project window and just click New Composition, or you can press Ctrl-N. We're going to call this Infinite Zoom. I'll quickly point out that I'm creating a timeline that is 29.97 frames per second. If you're using a different frame rate, that's absolutely fine, but the times that I reference later on might be slightly different for you. So let's go ahead and click OK. So go back up to your Images folder, open it up, and bring down image 001 onto your compositional timeline. So because we've set all of the images to import at 2 seconds long, this one is 2 seconds long as well. We want to keep them all at 2 seconds except for this first one, which we want to shorten to 1 second long. So go to 1 second, and then let's just drag the end down here. Now, keeping at the very last frame of this image at 1 second in, open up the settings and transform, and then click the stopwatch next to opacity and scale. That will add a keyframe next to both of these. Keep scale at 100%, and we're going to change opacity here to 0, and then click enter. Now go to the very first frame of the image, which at this point is the first frame of the sequence, and change the scale to 200%. Because the X and the Y are linked, you can see you only need to enter 200 once. Now we want to go 10 frames before the end of the image. As we're running a 30 frame a second video here, or 29.97 frames, we can go to frame 20, and we can then change the opacity to 100%. That will add a keyframe here to fade from 100% down to 0% at the end of the image. So we can now see we're zooming from 200% to 100%, and we're fading out for those last 10 frames. We now have keyframes which fade out our image in the last 10 frames on screen, helping transition to the lower resolution center of the next image. We also have keyframes which scale our image from 200% to 100% during its time on screen, which is effectively zooming out 2 times. However, as I showed you in my example earlier with infinite zooms made in Premiere Pro or DaVinci, if you were to keep this standard rate of zoom of 200 to 100%, it causes a weird sort of pulsing effect, and it looks like it's getting faster and slower, faster and slower. The way around this, and the reason I'm using Adobe After Effects for this, is to be able to apply exponential scale. To do this, select the first scale keyframe on the image, hold Shift and then select the last scale keyframe on the image. Right-click either of these keyframes, hover over Keyframe Assistant, and then select Exponential Scale. This will apply a fleet of keyframes and smooth out the zooming process appropriately. Now let's bring our next image down, which is 002. We want to bring this down below 001 and starting at the same point as it, at 0 seconds. Because this is 2 seconds long and the original one was 1 second long, this should be extending 1 second beyond the end of the first image. So let's do the same thing to this one as we did to the first one. We'll open up the transform options. We'll go to the last frame of this image, and we're going to click the stopwatch next to opacity and scale, setting opacity to 0%. We'll then go to 10 frames before the end of the image, which you can see here is 1 second and 20 frames, and we'll set the opacity to 100%. And then we'll go to the very first frame of this image, and this time we're going to set it to 400% scale. The reason for this is that each time we've done a zoom in MidJourney, we've zoomed out 200%. So as we zoom through the images here, an image at 100% scale, which you can see here for the first image, will perfectly merge into the center of the following image when it's set to 200%, which is this image here at 200%. You can see they perfectly merge. To ensure that the transition between the images is smooth and seamless, each image will start 1 second before the previous one finishes. As a result, even though it'll only really be in view for 1 second as it zooms from 200 to 100%, as it's 2 seconds long, we need to make sure that it's scaling at the same rate as the preceding image. So for all images other than the first, it'll be 2 seconds long, scaling from 400 to 100%. Once you've set that, as before, we'll select both scale keyframes, right-click, select Keyframe Assistant, and then Exponential Scale. You should now be able to scrub over this section and see it looks like a smooth zoom between the two images. We have just one more setting we need to change, and we actually need to go back to image 1 for that. So if you right-click on 001, go to Mask, and then select New Mask, that will create a mask on image 1. If we open the settings for that, we want to change Mask Feather to 100 pixels, and we want to change Mask Expansion to -100 pixels. Now bear in mind that these settings will be different if you haven't upscaled your images or if you're using images of a different resolution to that which I mentioned earlier. So that should be everything you need to do for the mask. Now the reason we need this is because MidJourney can create slight changes to the outer edges of the original image when doing a zoom, so that area can be slightly different on the next image. Using a mask in this way helps make sure that you don't have areas of your image suddenly changing mid-video. Now select the mask by left-clicking it once, press Ctrl-C or Command-C if you're on a Mac, left-click on image 002 and press Ctrl-V or Command-V. That then pastes a copy of this mask onto our second image. Now left-click and select the mask on image 2, hold Ctrl and select these settings for both scale and opacity, and then press Ctrl-C or Command-C, and it'll copy the mask, the scale, and the opacity settings. Now we want to bring the next image down onto our timeline, and that'll be 003. We want this to start at the same point that our previous image finished. So our current image is 002, our previous image is 001, and that finished at 1 second. So image 3, let's bring it down, and we want that to start at 1 second. In other words, we want the new image to start 1 second before the current image finishes. So that's 1 second back from here. Now if we move the timeline scrubber to the beginning of the new frame, and then we press Ctrl-V or Command-V, that is then going to paste a copy of the mask and the scale and opacity settings onto our new image, and making sure that the scrubber was on the first frame of this, it will make sure that the timing of all of these settings is correct. Now again, we can scrub through all of these images that we've created so far, and you can see that it perfectly zooms through them, and we don't have anything jumping in and out of existence as we do this. Now you can go ahead and hide the settings for each of your images to make it a bit easier to see, and then repeat the same process that we've done for images 2 and 3 for every image you've created for your video. If you're using DaVinci or Premiere, it's the exact same process that I've shown you here, but without exponential scale. But in DaVinci, there's a couple of extra steps we need to do. With all of your images that are 2 seconds long, which is all of them other than the first one, as once you've added your zoom keyframes at the beginning and end, so that'd be your 400% or times 4 in DaVinci, down to your 100% or times 1, you also want to add another keyframe halfway through at 1 second into the clip to times 2, and that makes sure that the zooms all sync up. Your 1 second clip, your first one, can still go from times 2 to times 1. There's no need for a middle keyframe on this one. The other thing is, with the mask in DaVinci, instead of adding a mask, you just select your image, and then under cropping, you take the softness down to -100. Now, if at this stage you find that despite the fact that you checked all your images were perfectly centered when you were exporting it, that you missed one, and that there was a jump, and as you can see here, this jumped up as it moves to the next image, there is a way that you can sort of bodge a fix here without having to go back and regenerate all of your images from this point. So to do it, figure out which image is the first one that has that change, and we can see here that this is image 20 that it changes. So I'm going to open the settings for image 20 and image 19, and I'll zoom in a bit here. Go to the start of the opacity change, basically the opacity keyframe on image 20, or whichever image you're changing, and then click the stopwatch for position, and then go to the start keyframe for the opacity change on the previous image, and still on your current image, select another keyframe here. And what we're going to do is we're going to basically change the position, the starting position of image 20, our problem image, to match the starting position of the previous image. With the keyframe we put at the end here, it's already going to match the following image, so we're just basically adding a bit of a move here. So we can see that image 20 is higher than image 19, so we're going to move image 20 down. So we'll pull this down quite a bit, and then we'll check how that looks. That's actually pretty spot on. I think it needs to come down just the tiniest bit more. So it's not 100% perfect, but it does save this video rather than us having to go back and regenerate all the images from this point. So now it's time to export our video in our preferred quality. At this stage, I'd still very much recommend exporting in the highest quality that you've got space for. Finally, we'll bring our exported video into our editing platform of choice, whether that be Premiere, DaVinci, or something else. Technically, your infinite zoom video can be complete at this point, but by importing it as a single clip, you can easily do things like speed up certain sections of your video or apply effects to the thing as a whole. Now, the main reason we are bringing our video in for one final edit is sound. We've created a great looking infinite zoom video, but until we add sound, it will feel lifeless and disconnected. For the video I posted a few days ago, I applied a music track to it, editing the speed of the video at parts to make sure that the key moments worked effectively with the tone change of the track. And I also created a soundscape reflecting what was on screen. To do this, you'll want to find a good repository of sound effects. I got a lot of mine from Envato Elements, but that's a subscription service. If you're after a great website to search for free sound effects, check out freesound.org. Alternatively, if you wanted everything to be AI generated and you're not in a rush, Meta is releasing AudioCraft, which is basically the audio equivalent of MidJourney. You put in a text response and it creates audio based on that request. It's not available to the public yet, but this is something to keep an eye on because it does seem pretty impressive. So, import your video, create a sequence to bring it down onto, make sure that your sequence is of the right resolution. So if we're making 4K, Hill will want 3840 by 2160, this is UHD resolution, click OK. Bring your clip down onto your sequence and it's going to say that it doesn't match the sequence settings because we've used slightly different resolutions exported by MidJourney. We'll click Keep Existing Settings, right click and scale to frame size. We then just need to change the scale to 101%, and I'll make sure that it fills our image at the correct aspect ratio. We can then go through and create our soundscape and add our music as we wish. Okay, so with our music applied and our soundscape finished, we can export our video and our infinite zoom is complete. Let's see how it came out. Hopefully this tutorial has helped you make an amazing infinite zoom video. I would love to see what you guys have made, so please do make sure that you post a link in the comments below on my Facebook page, post a tweet or a X or whatever it's called these days, and I'll make sure to come and check them out. Hey guys, please do like and subscribe, it means a lot, and I've got some great content coming up, everything from 3D printing and AI to drones and general gadgetry and geekery. For now, if you haven't already seen it, check out my full-length infinite zoom video covering the last 3.7 billion years on Earth, or when I converted a pumpkin into a portal gun turret. Otherwise, for now, thanks very much for watching guys, and I'll see you guys next time.